change and to represent my thoughts on such an important debate. Today, we are going to talk about national security nexus and cross-boundary climate security. My name is Talhat El Betty, and I'm environmentalist representing Institute of Regional Studies. And I'm looking after a program strengthening regional climate resilience. Having said that, let me start my presentation. What is climate change? Climate change is the observed change in the last 2000 years, which we see, and we usually talk about from 175 years from after industrial revolution. But what is actually happened in the 175 years in the historically? If you see this graph, you can clearly identify there's a pattern of CO2, carbon dioxide, and there's a pattern of climate temperatures which are happening around the world. Today, after industrial revolution, when we invented the steam engine, we have higher capacity of carbon emissions into the atmosphere. And the earliest papers which we observe, we have for climate sciences, or which give this reason that the carbon emissions it's generating the or increasing the effect of global temperatures is published in back in 1890s. So it's topic of 100 years of debate, and now we are at the point where the things are getting out of our hand. If you can see this graph, we have the highest percentage of ppm of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere, and that is what is actually increasing the temperature around the surface. And as you can see, the relevancy into the lower side of the graph. As you can see, there is in the graph we represented around 2000 years, the last 2000 years. As just to mention that, recently Guardian quoted that the 21st and 22nd of July was the hottest days ever recorded on the planet Earth. But the change was anticipated by the climate scientists, but the rapidness of the change is not expected. We are expecting these changes back and coming in 2050 or 2070, or like we are 40 to 50 years early on these changes. And due to that, we have this capacity of planetary boundaries. Back in 2023 in Sweden, there's a research conducted which is based on like 14 to 50 years of data collection, and they quantified planet Earth, into 9 boundaries. And in those 9 boundaries, we know now for sure, which is backed by the scientific data, that 6 out of that 9 boundaries are out of the safe working limits. And in that, climate change is only one of. So it is very important to talk about it, because now we are moving to uncharted territories. We do not know what is happening around us. We do not know what will happen around us. The level of uncertainty is too high that we cannot acknowledge the change itself. Because historically, these changes occur around like 100 years, 200 years, or even 500 years span. Now, but what we are seeing today is the change is happening within the 30 years of span. From 1990 to 2020, there is a humongous level of carbon dioxide which is emitted into the atmosphere, and I will share why. But before moving towards that, there is a serious connection between nature and security nexus, or nature and climate nexus, security nexus. Why I'm saying this? Because it is estimated that the global military footprint is approximately between 1600 to 3500 gigatons of CO2. And the last estimate we have published in Nature is around globally we have around 200 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions budget. This is the carbon budget we have for the planet Earth. But now we can observe that we have the data sets that 1600 to 3500 of gigatons is emitted by the global military carbon footprint. That is a huge number. That represents around 3 to 7% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And not only this, if we look at the latest stats, that how much hydrocarbons is used by a soldier or a person who is standing on the border or into the conflict zone, is around 83.4 liters. It's around 22 gallons, which consumed by an average US soldier onto the ground back in 2003. These data sets or these stats are for the 2003. Now you can imagine how much enhanced the fossil consumption is actually done. Back in World War II, this consumption is around 3.8 liters, around 1 gallon. In 2003, we have around 83 gallons, and now in 2024, we have more than that. You can imagine the number. There are more conflicts around the world. more migrations, higher expenditures on the arms than a decade ago. Most conflict hit zones are the most vulnerable climate zones because the poverty is there, which is making it more vulnerable. On top of those security crises, humankind is generating a natural crisis, which actually degenerate the soil, which produce the food security, insecurity, and there is droughts which produce water excess, security, insecurity, and there's melting glaciers we have in the north, which create floods. And in Pakistan, even this year, due to monsoon and due to small floods, we lost around 200 souls on the ground. So that is a big number which we need to counter it. Ladies and gentlemen, in Earth systems, we are approaching to a tipping point, a point of no return, as I've just showed you the limits of it. You might ask me, what is the relationship of natural degradation has to the peace and stability or the security? My answer is everything, because climate change is a risk multiplier to the new and pre-existing sources of tension. There is a level of emergency we are facing beyond the comprehensions today, because the apocalypse is no longer a distant future. It is happening right now, right in front of us. As you can see around the world, in the last year, EMDAD published a data report in which they quoted that 399 disasters happened in only 1 year. The climate bill was more than $220 billion, and we lost around 19,000 lives due to these natural disasters. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching to that, but the level of emergency is beyond our comprehension. We cannot now even adapt to those changes, because once back in early 2000 we crossed soft adaptation limits, and now we are moving towards hard adaptation limits. Because we live in now, if we don't take any necessity actions, we live in a world of lack, want, and scarcity. I want to show you the Siachen Glacier. The Siachen Glacier is 71 kilometer and one of the world's largest glaciers situated in the north of disputed region of Kashmir. It is by far the highest battleground above to the sea level, which is around 6,700 meters. Since 1984, both India and Pakistan have military positions in Siachen Glacier, and in winters the temperatures get down to minus 70 degree, which is unlivable for any biotic life. According to an estimate, 93% of casualties which occurred in Siachen is only due to the natural disasters rather than the conflict. Only 3% of the casualties occur due to the conflict, direct conflict. The rest of them are occur due to the instability of the natural habitat over there. There's humongous avalanches which we observe in the past. And why I'm saying this, what is actually climate security? Climate security refers to evaluating and managing and reducing the risk of peace and stability brought up by the climate crisis. If we have a disaster back in 2022, like in Pakistan, we have around 33 million people which are insecure. The hardest parts which are hit on the ground are poverty, when in the areas which have high levels of poverty, which have dysfunctional governance, and which have a conflict history into the past. So that is very important to look after that what climate security's answer. In the 21st century, as we all know that we are connected. I'm sitting in Islamabad right now, and I'm talking to you, all of you who are present in Geneva. That is where the connectivity comes in. And in today's world, if one part of the world is hit by a natural disaster or by a conflict, there is humongous implementations around the globe. And in this picture, I want to show you the region where one third of the population of the global population lives. This is the region which is most insecure into the climate spheres, because in this region we have multiple basins, water basins, and in this region we have highest range of mountains. We have everything around here. The biodiversity hotspots are here. The glaciers are here. The highest number of population density is here. So we need to look after this region more critically than the rest of the world. Why? Because if you see this graph, there is uninhabitable regions on the globe, and if you see this graph, there in into the regional side, there is a lot of area which is covered in black. That is the area which is uninhabitable in the coming years because of the higher temperatures and because of the extreme anomalies we are going to face in the coming time. So it is very important to talk about these nexus and to talk about these realities of the future which are necessary to come in the present time. And in the next slide, as you can see that there's a table, there's an infographic which is representing the losses to the economy. Like the areas which are vulnerable to the conflicts, which are vulnerable to poverty, which are vulnerable to dysfunctional governance, are also hit by the climate change to the maximum level. The global economy is facing $32 trillion of losses per annum every year after 2050. That is humongous size, and the regions where we live in into the world are extremely vulnerable. And this is not only happening in Pakistan. It is not only happening in Kashmir. It's happening in Palestine, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Syria, Sudan, Yemen. All of them are the climate vulnerable zone, and now due to conflicts they act as a catalyst to further deepen insecurities. The two catalytic events that have shaken the world is COVID-19 and the invasion of Gaza. Both have killed thousands and created millions of refugees. They raised questions onto the international law and conventions and created a sense of insecurity and trust deficit among the people of and among the people's heart and minds. For example, just wanted to give you this info. Wanted to explain this infographics that environmental degradation, biodiversity loss is directly related to insecurity and conflicts into the region. They enforce each other. Once the resources are scarce, people tend to fight for each other to have that resources, and that actually generate a lot of vicious cycle into the time which we are observing into our spheres. I gave you one example. For example, the Afghan war left the toxic chemicals into the soil, water, and air, which required a generations to clean up. People live near the American bases observe that the U.S. military lacks even the minimal environmental codes, which is needed to protect the nations around, protect the areas around that particular basis. So the decade of the decades of conflict onto an Afghan soil resulted into the deforestation rate to 95%. It is humongous. The resources are depleting, and the number of population or the population is increasing. We have more mouths to feed than in the past, and we have least or less resources than what we have in the past. Since 2022, there has been an increase in war conflicts. Internationally, crisis group indicated that the conflicts in Libya, Syria, Yemen, Azerbaijan, Ethiopia, and Kashmir were on the natural resources, basically on water, land, and air. So we need to understand this nexus of security and to the nature itself, and we need to get out from this vicious cycle in which we it is very hard to maintain the stability and peace if in the longer run. What we have observed in COP29 last year is that the world is moving toward, is unable to overcome the promises of of the emissions. But in on those targets, we already excluded the military footprints. We do not have any data around the globe or the repository that how much carbon footprint do we have for the military. In COP29, this issue has been raised, and in COP28, this issue has been raised, but nothing much has been done. Let me show you why I'm putting into this, because if we talk about Pakistan, Pakistan is the eighth most vulnerable country in the world. We have majorly observed increased temperatures. We have 8 heat waves back in 2022. We have more than double-digit heat waves in 2023, and in this year, we also faced a lot of heat waves. So we have frequent intense weather events like floods and heat waves regularly around us, which is creating insecurity among the people. And we have a very vast level of glacier retreat in our north side, which we call third pole. This is the highest region around the world, around the whole planet, where apart from north and south pole, this is the highest place of glaciers which are present on the surface of the earth. So it is very important for us to understand. And not only this, due to these unaccountable or due to this failure to complete their promises from the G20 or the developing world, we have changes in our monsoon pattern, and these monsoon patterns generate more resource scarcity into the environment. We have longer spells of dryness. So we have multiple disasters. We are now facing a poly crisis. Do not face a single crisis. We face a poly crisis, which is by far most insecure place to live in. So it is very important to talk about these changes, because most of the emissions come from the private sector, but military also have its role. According to enlisted estimates, which is on the
Can
water.
you please conclude it now?
Yeah, yes, sir.
I'm running short.
Just coming to that. The US military has actually produced 1.2 billion tons of CO2 emissions from 2001 to 2017. This is humongous. 400 million tons of carbon dioxide is emitted after 9/11. And that the center of these emissions were Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan. This is humongous. And in the last, I want to recommend some of the recommendations which are very important to talk about. Stop excluding military pollution from the climate agreements. We need to add them into the main databases. Address the linked nature security crisis with joint solutions. We need cross-boundary resilience. We cannot control these natural disasters singularly. We need more people and more hands. Government should need to support international and regional corporations rather than working in silos. Government should invest and make a transparent platform in which we can share our best practices. Even in the military, the NATO has that. We can do in our regional scale and also share the projects which are not intended to have the best results. The UN has a central role in this approach. The UN Security Council should address the environmental crisis and open the borders for science and climate. And in the last and the most important, demilitarization of the glaciers for climate. Make Siachen Mountain a climate responsible to showcase that the people of India and Pakistan are serious about protecting the future generations of South Asia. With that, thank you so much for inviting me. Best of luck.
Thank you, Tahan Batisa. I request not to take photographs. Only a person authorized by the NGO is allowed to take the photographs. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Abdur Rahman, Research Officer at Center for International Strategic Studies, Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Abdur Rahman, you have the floor.
Mr. Abdur Rahman, come online, please.
He's online.
Yes. Unmute yourself. Abdur Rahman, unmute yourself.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are now audible.
Okay. Thank you and good afternoon from Muzaffarabad. I would like to express gratitude to the International Action for Peace and Sustainable Development and the Kashmir Institute of International Relations for giving me the opportunity. Okay. Often when we discuss the conflict in Kashmir, social, political, and military aspects dominate the discourse, while the critical environmental concerns take a backseat. In the limited time assigned to me, I would like to attempt to provide a bird's eye view of the environmental crisis, which is intertwined with the ongoing conflict. So let me share my presentation with you. Okay, is my presentation visible to you?
Yes, yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So these are the aspects which I would like to talk about. My presentation will basically revolve around the conflict-induced climate crisis in Jammu and Kashmir. So I would start with the extreme weather events. Sorry, climate change vulnerability. You know, climate change is a global phenomena, and how particularly Kashmir is getting affected by this phenomena. I would talk about it. Then I would come to the impact of line of control on biodiversity of Jammu and Kashmir, militarization and environmental degradation. I would talk about the ecological imbalances in marginalized communities, those communities which are particularly affected by this climate change. Then I would talk about the water scarcity and Indian hydroelectric projects in the Kashmir. So the first point, the climate change vulnerabilities. You know, with increasing global temperature, the extreme weather events are increasing exponentially. It has been observed that temperature of Jammu and Kashmir is rising from the past 20 years, especially from the past 20 years. According to the data from the University of Kashmir, Department of Geoinformatics, temperature increases have been particularly noticeable in higher elevations, such as Gulmarg, Pahalgam, and Gazikund. The temperature spikes, especially in the winter season, cause abnormal weather patterns, including heavier snowfall or excessive rainfall. This temperature rise also contributes to faster glacial melt, which in turn affects river flows, leading to flooding during the seasons and droughts in others. Unseasonal snowfalls, cloudbursts, flash floods like the one in Neelam in 2022, which killed more than 23 people, are also becoming recurrent in Jammu and Kashmir. Secondly, water stress. Kashmir's water resources are increasingly strained due to the climate change and conflict-induced disruptions. The region's glaciers crucial for sustaining river systems are retreating rapidly, as Mr. Talha has talked about, and reducing water availability and exacerbating seasonal shortages. This declining water resources impacts agriculture. You know, agriculture, Jammu Kashmir is an agricultural society based on fruit farming, and it is impacting it a lot. Then agricultural impacts, changing temperature and precipitation patterns. Climate change basically changes the precipitation patterns, which is impacting on crop yields and thus on farmers. Indian administered Kashmir, once a leading producer of 80% of India's apple, has experienced a nearly 30% reduction in the over the recent years. The Arctic climate has disrupted the optimal temperature and conditions essential for apple and saffron, while introducing new pests and diseases to which these crops have not adopted. This decline in agricultural productivity has significant impact on food security and economic security. Then the health risks, climate change in Kashmir exacerbates health risks by increasing prevalence of waterborne diseases and heat-related illnesses. Rising temperatures and altered precipitation patterns create favorable environment for the diseases like malaria and dengue, etc. The second point I want to talk about is the militarization and environmental degradation. You know, the line of control is a unique and tense military zone with the regular armies of India and Pakistan facing each other eyeball to eyeball. Much of the LOC is situated above the snow line, requiring troops to maintain heating round the clock during the winters and at some high altitude locations around the year. To meet the heating needs, troops rely heavily on kerosene. According to a study, each Indian soldier consumes an average of 250 milliliters of kerosene daily. This translates into 112 liters of kerosene per month per post and 1,350 liters annually. With over 150 Indian Army posts in Siachen, the total annual consumption amounts to 2,02,500 liters of kerosene. You can see the amount of kerosene burned on that glaciers. Of course, these burning fossil fuels create smoke clouds which accumulate above the snow line, which then
Abdurrahman,
traps excess.
dear Abdurrahman, can you conclude in next 2 minutes?
Okay, sir, I have a lot to talk about. Uh,
Yeah, I know that,
okay,
but we have just left 6 minutes and we have one more speaker to accommodate. Please.
okay. I would like to talk about the impact of life on biodiversity of Azad Kashmir. This is the map of AJK, and you can see all the hotspots of wildlife are situated along the line of control, which means the line of control is basically dissecting their habitat, and it is disrupting their ancient migration corridors. Migration is not a mere whim for these creatures; it's a lifeline, and the LSE is damaging it. Then maiming of wildlife. I want to show you this picture. This is the common leopard, which is an endangered species, was maimed due to a landmine, anti-human land, and then wildfire ignition. Wildfire, because of cross-border firing, is a recurrent phenomena which is causing enormous amount of CO2 emission in this land. This just to show you how the conflict affects wildlife. This is a map of uh, uh, scientists who tracked the movement of greater spotted eagles. You can see the in the pre-conflict times, the spotted eagles used to stay in the Ukrainian territory, but during the conflict, they avoided that territory. It shows how sensitive these animals are for in case of conflict. Then I would like to talk about.
Yeah.
Just give me 1 minute. Just give me 1 minute. I have to talk about the dams as well. But to conclude my presentation, I would like to quote Mr. Peter H. Glick from the Pacific Institute of Studies in Development, Environment and Security, conducted an analysis of 203 significant incidents spanning as far back as 3000. In Pakistan India case, if we apply these historical wisdom to this Pakistan India scenario, these are potential irritants, or you can say the triggers of conflict in a region. Water can be a trigger, is a very important, has potential of a conflict in this region. These are six categories: control of water resources, military tool, political tool,
Abhinavan sir,
development.
we have left with 2 minutes, so we have to accommodate another speaker. Thank you very
Okay,
much
sir.
for your presentation.
Thank,
We'll love to hear from you next time.
thank you,
Sir,
sir.
next speaker.
Uh, Thank you. Actually,
बस
we were
आखिरी आखिरी
late
आखिरी
to
आखिरी
contact you all people. Now our
ईशा
next speaker is
ईशा राणा.
Isha Tariq, researcher at Kashmir Institute of International Relations. Isha, you have the floor.
Isha, take the floor.
First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Sir Altaf Wani and International Action for Peace and Sustainable Development for giving me the opportunity to speak on this crucial issue. And thank you everyone joining this webinar today. As we come together, I want to ask you all to take a moment and reflect on something often overlooked in conflict zone, the environment. When we think of militarization, our minds naturally go to human rights abuses and political struggles. But there is another layer that demands our attention, the environment itself. In Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the military presence is having a devastating impact not only on people's lives but on the very land they depend on. Forests are being cleared to make way for military infrastructure, and with that, the region is facing a climate shift, and that could spell disaster. This in the past decade, the valley has experienced a temperature increase of 1.2 degrees Celsius, a 35% of decline in monsoon rains, and 10% less snowfall. Imagine what that means for farmers and local ecosystems. These changes are crippling the region's ability to thrive. Let's not forget the role of improper waste disposal play in this. Military operation generated an estimated 3,000 metric tons of plastic waste annually in Kashmir, with over 1,700 tons dumped carelessly. The result: contaminated water, degraded soil, and lands no longer fit for agriculture. This pollution directly impacts the lives of Kashmiri people, particularly those who depend on farming to survive. Their fields are becoming barren, and as soil fertility declines, so do their hopes for secure livelihood. The shrinking glacier tells a similar story. Glaciers like Majui and Kolahoi are retreating at an alarming rate, 29% and 18% respectively. This poses a severe threat to water availability. Initially, the rapid melting of glacier causes flood, but soon after, it leads to water shortage during dry periods.
एक मिनट है अभी एक मिनट है
These
Thank you very much.
unpredictable water cycles are devastating for farmers, disrupting their traditional
करो
practices
आप
and
कंटिन्यू.
threatening for food security
Thank
in
you very
already
much
vulnerable
everybody to
regions.
participate in this side event. Actually, we are very sorry that we didn't find enough time. So actually, there was some problem for connecting with the speakers. So thank you very much for participating. And
I'm sorry, they are not audible. Hello?
Thank you so much, everyone.
Does anyone know what happened?